Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of CPO Perspective. I am delighted to have as my guest Sebastian Golby-Meek to share his experience and view. Sebastian, perhaps you just want to introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hello and morning, Richard, and thanks for having me on.
Morning.
So I'm Sebastian Golby-Meek. I'm currently the Group Head of Procurement at Go Ahead, where I lead our strategic procurement team. Also, we provide some operational support services across our 15 UK and international operating companies. My background, as I'm sure we'll get on to, has largely been in transportation. So other than a brief stint in energy. So it's been nearly 20 years across various procurement and commercial roles in both public and private sectors. I am MSIPS qualified. So my degree is actually in marketing and management. So like many in procurement, it may not have been the original plan, but it's always something I've been interested in regards to business, commerce.
Just as a matter of interest, what was the original plan?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure how many kind of clear answers you get to that. What I knew kind of going through education is that I had a real interest in business. So I'd read about it, I'd follow it, I'd kind of take an interest. So I knew that I wanted to do something in that kind of broad arena. It was just pinpointing exactly what it was that you're going to do in that. And I've always had an interest in marketing. So that was an easy kind of next step when it came to the degree, is do some things that you like. Perhaps I could have told an earlier version of myself to do that at other educational levels. But yeah, if you do something you like, then obviously you're going to have more interest in it.
And did you go into marketing to start then, or not in the end?
So I came off my university degree not in a great economic environment. It was 2009. So a lot of organisations, particularly in the kind of marketing sector, weren't recruiting. Pickings were relatively slim. But I was really keen to join a graduate scheme. And having applied for a few, I did get offered one at Tube Lines, which was a private entity who were responsible for a third of the London Underground. And they had a commercial scheme, which was quite broad. So it covered lots of things in business, which kind of ticked the earlier box. It didn't really have marketing as such, because it had one client with London Underground. But it did give that kind of broad appeal.
Got it. And then from there, you're at Tube Line. You've gone into a grad scheme. What was your path now to being a CPO?
Well, I guess as always, it's not a perfectly straight line. But I think that probably makes me more rounded as a procurement leader. So at Tube Lines, I'm just going to kind of dwell on that for a few minutes, just because it was a really informative time. So I had the opportunity during that grad scheme, which was 2 years, to get involved in quite a few things. So main ones of which were project management. So that was actually my first placement. So I was working nights at Finsbury Park Station in North London.
I know it.
Which was undergoing a multi-million-pound refurbishment at the time. So you could kind of just straight into it, working nights, having to do safety talks for dozens of contractors, but also getting involved with organising suppliers, services, project coordination. So that was really interesting to get thrown into that. It was also from there I moved on into some post-contract management, also on a similar project. And that was the first taste, really, of kind of pre and post contract. And then I moved from that into some procurement roles. So I was doing some sourcing. I specifically remembered the first thing I bought, which was some emergency signage for a station.
Yep.
But then that quickly moved on to supporting the Jubilee Line fleet. We were bringing maintenance in-house. So that was actually quite a big project. There were lots of people involved. I won't say that it was my hand solely, but that was creating a supply chain for the in-house maintenance and moving away from what was then the kind of sole maintenance provider. And then I guess some potential wildcards was in asset management and communications. So both separate placements, not the same thing, but both interesting. On the former, so I was within a team that was responsible for long-term asset maintenance and renewal plans for power equipment, which as a headline probably sounds a bit boring. But that was an interesting change in perspective. So on a project, things are hopefully relatively short term, and you are getting things done quickly. Whereas with asset management, you're talking about potentially decades. So it's a very different way of looking at things. And then I had a short stint in the comms team as well.
Oh, right.
So I was helping pull together internal communications and press releases. So I mean that was one of the good things about that graduate scheme, is that you can do quite different things, and you're not just confined to doing one role for those 2 years.
Right. Yeah.
But during that 2-year period, Tube Lines was bought and assimilated into Transport for London. So that very quickly brought me into the public sector.
Right.
And after that scheme finished, I then came to a fork in the road. And that fork was, do I go pre or post contract? So I was offered 2 different roles,
right.
Either as a procurement manager or as a commercial manager. And this is a bit of a winding road. So hopefully you are still with me. So I ended up going for the commercial role.
Post-contract, right.
Yeah, so I started off in post-contract. So that was as a commercial manager for the engineering division of the Underground. So that engineering division is based out in West London, northwest London, but it services the whole of the Underground network. That was a really interesting time. I mean, engineering, again, quite different. But I mean, that involved managing some 8-figure contracts. I was responsible for the departmental budgeting, pricing for the services that were sold internally, and there were some external clients as well. So that was kind of first-hand experience of maintaining kind of customer satisfaction with the bottom line. I mean, fortunately, my job was to ensure that we broke even, rather than it was profit making. But I mean, that's still a challenge in itself. And that grounding in kind of P&L accountability gave me a real appreciation of then kind of the procurement world and how that feeds into commercial management as well. And I mean, I reflect on that time like quite fondly, because there were some really good experiences that I'll remember. Like, I mean, I'm sure for the rest of my life. Working on night shifts, on the attracts, which obviously you would never go to otherwise. Sitting in drivers' cabs of engineering trains, going through the tunnels, giving you a view of what you don't get as a passenger. You're kind of forward facing. And also being on some open roof trailers going through underground tunnels on the Northern Line. Obviously, this is all when it was closed to traffic, and there was there was works going on. But those are all things that you couldn't have got anywhere else. But I quickly then moved on to take responsibility for the Piccadilly Line fleet as well.
Right.
So that's one of the underground passenger fleets. And that's where I was more involved in procurement. So I was specifying the procurements. And I was developing the procurement strategy for the life extension of the fleet. So that's where that kind of interaction was strengthened between pre and post contract. But also, I think that's another thing that's really stayed with me. And this is ultimately getting to the point, Richard. But knowing how contracts are used after the point of award is something that's stayed with me, and I've really encouraged all of my teams to go and do. Because unless you use those tools and mechanisms that go into the contract from the pre-contract stroke procurement teams, it is difficult to get a full appreciation of how it works. It is quite easy, and of course it's a generalism to say, oh yeah, you just sign the contract and move on. But the impact of that, once you're responsible for it and you know what works and doesn't, I think it helps you do some better pre-contract procurement as well. So that then led me to my first role at Go Ahead, actually. So I was responsible for rolling stock procurement. So this was kind of major interventions, overhauls, but I think most importantly, actually buying new trains, which is quite exciting.
Every boy's dream.
Maybe not everyone, but I think probably a lot. I mean, being involved in procurements that are over £1 billion does come with some level of responsibility, but it is interesting. It is very complex. You can imagine a specification on a train runs to many thousands of pages. But it was during that time, so I was responsible for 3 train operators that we had in the group. But I also got involved in bid work. So it was a bit of an overlap with the business development team. So at that point, we were bidding for new train franchises that were coming up from the Department of Transport. So I was in that role for a couple of years, and without going to too much industry detail, I ended up going on a short-term secondment to the Southeastern trains, and that became an unwitting turning point. So the short-term secondment was just to kind of see things through for 2 or 3 months while a contract renewal was going on. And having been involved in the bid work for this, that there was a bit of continuity there. So the original scope was to hold the fort and then help recruit someone new into that role. But things quickly changed, as they often do. And I ended up staying. I think ultimately I was there for about 4 years. So
wow, okay.
That is some secondment. I actually moved over permanently at some point during that. But I inherited a team of 2 when I first moved into that role on the secondment, which were largely doing transactional and kind of admin work, processing purchase orders, etc. But I mean, that was quickly known to be insufficient in terms of where we wanted it to get to. So it was a real development role. Ultimately, I kind of built that out into a team of 14.
Right.
So to turning it from looking at strategic and admin activities, tactical activities, to genuine strategic procurements, stakeholder engagement across the business, introducing sustainability programs and charters, getting involved in commercial negotiations,
right,
helping in the budgeting process.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was a much more rounded team that we ended up with, and the structure was kind of akin to a kind of business partnership approach. Is that we had members of the team that were kind of facing off with different internal departments. But it was a really interesting time. I also took Southeastern from private sector to public sector, so there was a bit of a kind of crossover again.
Okay.
But after those 4 years and a fair amount of work having been done, it kind of felt like it was around about the time to start kind of moving on. And it was an interesting dilemma. So I kind of felt the cycle coming back around of the contracts that you let 2 or 3 years ago, well, maybe 4 years ago, coming back for renewal. But the team had developed to such an extent at that point that it did truly feel like I kind of needed to move on for their benefit. Of course, you're not always going to be in that situation. But
it's a nice position, right? You've grown the team to the point that you feel it's time for you to let them take over the nest.
It is. I'm not trying to suggest that this is purely altruistic, but for there to be such a clear plan after you leave a team in a good place, that was quite reassuring, and also provided opportunity, and it was opportunity that I think they were ready to take on. So I left, and the kind of structure shuffled in the way that had been planned for that succession. And I just realised how much kind of bouncing back and forth there is here. I ended up going back to Transport for London on an interim role as Head of Governance, Risk and Assurance. So I was within the commercial and procurement team. So I brought together pre and post contracts. And the key difference there was size. So my first time round, I was part of the operational organisation. This was then the kind of group function, and there were 600 people across procurement and commercial. And I was responsible for all the governance, risk and assurance, so all the policies, all the internal governance and assurance procedures, and documentation. And again, the reason why I took that is for the breadth of experience. So I had done some of it at Southeastern. It was needed to kind of make that a self-sufficient organisation that moved away from go ahead into public ownership.
Got it.
This is kind of the next step. So going from a team of 14 to 600 is
which is a big
quite some difference. And the kind of interface that they have with local government, the London Mayor, national government, was also something that I thought would be of interest from the experience point of view, and it was. There was some learning that I had there that helped me understand some of the things earlier in my career, and some things that I've also taken forward. So I was there for about a year. I mean, that was always an interim step. And then I set up my own consultancy following that, which enabled me to work. I mean, it's still very much transport focused, but I worked with the West Midlands Rail Executive, who are an organisation based in the West Midlands, who are jointly responsible with the Department of Transport for managing the West Midlands Trains contract. So I was actually working client side, whereas previously I'd worked operator side. And again, that was a kind of move into an area of experience that I hadn't had before. And with all these things, the more perspective you get, the more you learn, and the more you kind of understand different actions and behaviours that happen. I mean, really, really good team there across WMRE and the DFT. So I was actually head of contract management for WMRE on an interim basis. And then I came back to go ahead on a consultancy basis. So this was, I think it was about 8 months, where there were some specific deliverables. So there were some large-scale infrastructure procurements. There was a complete redesign of policies, procedures, processes, so that kind of lent into the governance experience that I'd had, but also developing a new team structure. So that was kind of end of 2024. I went off and did another consultancy piece of work with West Midlands Trains, before being tempted back on a permanent basis to go ahead, which is obviously where I am now. But I think. So sorry, I was just going to kind of add there that I think each of those roles added a layer. So
Yes.
governance and assurance, some contract management, some risk, and kind of strategic procurement. Sustainability as well, probably something I've not touched on too much there, but there was a lot of work in sustainability over those years. And that's something that I've kind of brought together at Go Ahead now.
Do you know what? Thank you for sharing. And I mean, it's interesting. You're quite unusual in that you've pursued a thread in one industry, but there are a couple of things that really stood out, which is being on the commercial side. So having visibility of business priorities and P&L throughout the entire thing. Everything you've talked about has involved talking to people. I mean, whether it was right back at the beginning. So with that experience, and as you say, those layers, what's on your mind right now about our profession? I mean, what is it about procurement that's sort of exercising your mind as you look at it today?
It's a good question, and probably a fairly difficult one to answer. But I mean, I think the conversation procurement has rightly shifted over time. So if I recall back to one of my kind of first experience around procurement, it was always, the question was, how much did you save?
Yeah.
So your targets were almost always versus what the budget was, which is just fine, assuming the budget is correct. Whereas now, I think things have, in a good way, and obviously this will vary organisation by organisation, but procurement's, I think, often seen in a slightly broader context of what value did you create. And obviously, savings are part of most procurement teams' remit,
Yep.
and that is one of our kind of reasons for being. So, I mean, that is good, and obviously you need to do that. And I'm really proud that our team delivered over £20 million last year. But that's only one
Fantastic.
metric I think we should celebrate. And I think it undersells what a modern procurement team can do. I mentioned sustainability. So that is very much kind of on my mind on a frequent basis. We actually just launched a new sustainable procurement charter last week, actually. So that's the second iteration that Go Ahead has released. And that's part of, I think, the answer to that question of kind of what's my mind and what does procurement look like.
And if I can just inquire, sustainability against cost. I mean, there are as you say, so many angles to value. Are you seeing a recognition amongst owners of P&Ls that balance of sustainability and cost has got to be looked at in a very different way to 5, 10, 15 years ago?
I think it is looked at differently, but it's horses for courses, and each organisation's priorities will differ. So my experience now will be different to maybe some of our listeners, and what their kind of order of priority is. Our challenge has been to bring in tangible, sustainable initiatives and demonstrate that things are coming out of our procurements other than the financial value without increasing the bottom line cost. And that is difficult. Obviously, the more you ask the supply chain to do, the higher you have your standards. Typically, the more that can drive cost in.
Yeah.
But our approach has been to promote and incentivize the work that the supply chain is doing, to kind of subtly shift that to align with our objectives rather than kind of adding in a lot of hurdles. Because the other element that we're looking at, so it's not just kind of environmental sustainability. There's the kind of SME, the social elements as well. And we want to make sure that we are not creating barriers for SMEs to engage with us.
Got it. And I guess are you fully subject to Public Procurement Act?
We are, as of 10 days ago, we are not. GTR, Covid Thameslink Railway, exited Go Ahead just under 2 weeks ago, has gone back into public ownership. So that operation was subject to it. Or other operating companies, the 15 we have across the UK and internationally, do not. So that does mean that we've got a bit more flexibility. Obviously, I've worked in both with utilities regulations, with the Procurement Act. We do align a lot of our governance and procedures around it, so that we have those same principles like fairness, open, transparent. And as a transport organisation, we do occasionally have public funding. So one of the things that we've been working on is the zero emission bus schemes across the UK. So bringing in electric buses outside of London. So there's been some partial funding around those activities. But with that come a couple of strings, which are obviously fair as part of the funding, and that's that you are procuring in line with the public procurement regulations.
And interesting. I mean, one of the themes within the Public Procurement Act was a big push to encourage greater, social access and access for SMEs. I mean, do you see that working, or since it's a short time, is it working in the way that's intended? Do you think it's helping that SME access to your supply chain?
I do think it's probably a bit too early to just have a definitive view on whether it is working or it isn't. I mean, there are. It's a very clear procedure when you're in kind of public procurement, and while that provides some clarity, so you understand how things are being evaluated, it should be fairly clear how you can express interest and participate. But I mean, there is still, for SMEs, a lot of administration as part of it. And depending on the size of your SME, the more you are towards the S side of that, it is difficult to balance resources to bid on public work. And I mean, I've had feedback from some SMEs that suggests that is the case. And rather than bidding for every opportunity, they have to be quite selective, because of the amount of pre-qualification work and documentation they need to provide. I mean, all of that stuff is necessary. And of course, you want to do your assurance and diligence. It does also come with another, it's a bit of a double-edged sword.
Yeah,
and that's that it's slightly less accessible than I think some would like.
Final question, if I may. Obviously, if we go right back to the beginning, when you were talking about your experience on the grad scheme, you mentioned late nights, talking to suppliers, safety briefs, getting people engaged. That, fairly heavy duty on the ground supplier collaboration. Do you think, to what extent do you think supplier collaboration is going to contribute to that balance of, preserving P&L while driving sustainability? Do you think it's got a big role to play, or not so much?
I do think it does. So one of my responsibilities at the moment is, so we've got strategic procurement, but also the management of our strategic contracts. So it's something that we've been proactively developing, and a large part of that, and as you've pointed out, I think a large part of all of this is around communication. It's about that engagement. It's about engagement with suppliers, because if they don't understand what direction you're trying to go with, how are they going to help?
Exactly. Wonderful.
Equally, I think without having that engagement with them sometimes I think you need to be a bit self-reflective as well. Organizations, it's quite easy to imagine that everything's perfect and you are only sourcing, but it is a two-way relationship. And there are some things that you can get from the supply chain that are genuinely quite valuable for you to take on board to make you as an organization easy to do business with. But I mean, I guess that kind of lends to what the kind of principles that would apply to both supplier engagement, to team development, in terms of advice for someone starting out. And that's kind of to be inquisitive and to really know your customer, or in this case, potentially your supplier.
Wonderful.
Which all sounds very simple, but it is foundational. I mean, procurement are a service function. We can't do our jobs if we don't have a deep understanding of what our customers need. So clear roles and responsibilities as part of that, both within the procurement team itself, but with your customers internally. So people know who's doing what and when, that you communicate with them regularly. I mean, these are things that you could probably get in a textbook very early on.
Yeah.
But the application of them is a different thing. And when you've got your head down and you've got piles of things to do, it is sometimes easy to overlook some of the kind of simple things. And communicating with your internal customers and with your suppliers is something that I don't think should be forgotten. If people don't know what you're doing, then I suspect that they will think that nothing is happening.
Wonderful.
But kind of going back to that first point.
Final question. Yeah. Sorry, I think we had a break in connection there. I was going to say final question, and I'm going to kind of guess which way it's going. But if you had one piece of advice for someone who was like you all those years ago, just starting out in procurement, what would your advice be to them?
I'm going to kind of lean on that last point of being inquisitive. You really need to, you do need to understand your organization. So whatever you do, whether you are working in an organization that's doing banking, whether you run trains and buses, whether you're shipping or anything in between, unless you know what your organization does, it is difficult for you to be able to provide the best service that you can. So I guess my advice there is to get out. You can't do some of this stuff behind a desk. You'll make those relationships and build them quicker if you are standing there, potentially in the middle of the night, potentially in the pouring rain.
Yeah.
Hopefully it'll be a nice day. Unless you kind of go and see what happens, where your organization kind of makes its money, then that I think that's how you build your credibility, but also that's how you build your background. So when you go and do different roles, whether it's in that organization or not, you've got more context, and I think ultimately it helps you to kind of do your role better.
I think that's wonderful advice. Sebastian, thank you so much for joining me. It's been wonderful listening to both your career and your observations on procurement. And I wish you the best of luck with whatever the next transformation is in our transport, which improvement is always a good thing. Sebastian, thank you. And look, if you've enjoyed this, please give feedback. If you would like to be a guest, please reach out. But on behalf of myself and for you, the listener, Sebastian, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Richard. You're very welcome.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.